Now this is Dead Man's Corner, and down there is the N13, which led to Carentan, and it became known as Purple Heart Lane due to the fighting over the period of 9th to the 11th of June. And just past that bend is the first of 4 bridges that had to be crossed. And we'll be going down that way. Our Dead Man's Corner got its name from an incident that happened on the 7th of June. Now some Sherman and Stuart tanks, like this one, were approaching Carentan down this road, and a Stuart tank got hit by a Panzerfaust. The other tanks retreated, but the commander of the tank, his body was visible in the turret for a few days. So once the Americans took over this area, which is on the 8th, this junction became known as Dead Man's Corner. Now the building was the aid station and headquarters of the 6th Fallschirmjäger. Colonel van der Heijdt had his headquarters there before they got pushed out. Today it's a museum. On the 8th the Germans started pulling out. Some used the N13 to Carentan, and some used the railway line. The retreat was led by the men of the 1058. Colonel van der Heijdt wasn't at all pleased with their actions. So this is the first bridge, which is still in place. This is over the River Jordan. They've now made a new bridge to take the traffic. Now on the 9th, the push onto Carentan was started. Colonel Sink made a reconnaissance sortie. The second bridge had been blown up. It had been blown up by the Germans against the orders of Colonel van der Heijdt. He had ordered explosives to be set in place on the bridges, but then added it was only on express orders from himself that the bridge should be blown. As he moved away, he heard an enormous explosion. It was August Gunnerman who did it. Singh got to the bridge to find the bridge blown. They found a boat that they used by rowing with some planks. As they advanced down the causeway, they got fired on by what Singh thought to be American machine guns. That had in fact been captured and were being used by Germans. They barely managed to get back across the Douve. The boat they had was riddled with bullets. An hour later, Lieutenant Gehauf went up in a Piper to fly over Carentan and Pommenauque, looking for the best route to Bayonne, which was their objective. He came back to say that Carentan wasn't heavily defended. Another flight by Captain Pitt was looking to see if the railway line could be used. He saw that one of the bridges had been blown up, so that was a no-go. The N13 was the only way in. Gehauf still didn't trust his own reconnaissance and optimism. He decided to go down the causeway. With a patrol of 10 men, he crossed the Douve using a small boat and several trips. It was in the dark now, and they got to the 4th bridge and managed to move the Belgian gate which blocked the road. Of course the road was a lot narrower than it is now. They managed to move the Belgian gate about 15 inches, enough for them to squeeze through. Then they came under fire, but they stayed splayed out on the ground. They counted 12 machine guns and made a sketch of their positions. Gehauf sent a runner back to Lt Col to be sure to bring up mortars to deal with the machine guns. Nichols met Cole the other side of the Douve and gave the message that Gehauf had said not to attack. The man with him realised this was the opposite of what Gehauf had said, but fear kept him silent. As well as the sketches, another useful act carried out by Gehauf's team was Private Roach cutting the wires on explosives under the bridge. So Cole took his men back to Les Quesnils to get some sleep. At 9:30, Cole got the word they should move out in the afternoon, this time with artillery support. Now at bridge number 2, they found the engineers had still done nothing. Cole got some men to bring up some planks. They made a makeshift bridge with the planks, rope and the remains of the Belgian gate that had been on the bridge before it was blown up. They had to cross one at a time. A sniper was on some dry ground to the right of the bridge. Private Williams crawled towards him till he could throw a grenade, but it didn't go off. Staff Sergeant Zarowski came up just as Williams threw another grenade, and Zarowski fired his carbine. They heard the Germans scream. They now argued about who got him. Cole was moving among the men, telling them to spread out, but as soon as he moved on, they clumped together again. It took 3 hours to get most of the battalion across the bridge. At bridge number 4, they had forced the cables to make a wider gap. Gehauf was wondering why they'd been so apprehensive before. Cole was still at bridge number 2, urging the men across. The battalion spread right back to the Pont de Douve. It was now that the Germans opened up from Ingouf farm, along the banks of the marshes, and even from islands in the marshes. The artillery support was firing too far. Gehauf sent word that they should reduce the range by 200 yards, but it wasn't until 2200 hours that they actually got the message. The men who'd gone past the Belgian gate couldn't go back because there was just ringing of bullets pinging on it. In the evening of the 10th, they suffered a rare attack from the Luftwaffe. The Stukas went the length of the causeway, strafing, and another one crossed perpendicularly and dropped some bombs. As night fell, the artillery stopped firing. Now at bridge number 3, a machine gun was set up, firing at Ingouf farm, which was visible from here at the time. That quietened the German machine guns a bit and allowed more men to get through the Belgian gate. Now between bridge number 3 and bridge number 4, it was just a straight road, no trees at the time, so the Germans on the banks had a clear view onto the Americans, and there were Germans in the marshes. So this was the worst part of Purple Heart Lane. They couldn't see the Germans to fire back at. Lieutenant Larish was hit between the eyes. Captain Clements was grazed on both thighs. Lying on his back, he pulled down his pants to check that his family jewels were still intact. One trooper who's on the right hand side of the road ran across to this side of the road, and he asked the man he met, he said, "Is it better this side?" He said, "How the hell do I know?" After a few minutes he ran back the other side. He said, "Hell, it's worse on the left side than it is on the right side." Cole said to Captain Clements that he should try to get his men to swim across the Madeleine away from the bridge. If they could get a rope across, they could pull men over. It wasn't only the 3rd Battalion men involved. Lieutenant Coombs of B Company got his platoon across the river by swimming. In the early morning of the 11th, the men who'd got past Bridge 4 were trying to take shelter in ditches or dips. The line wasn't at all straight. Cole knew that as daylight came, the Germans would pound them with mortars. He went along the lines telling the men to fix bayonets and that they would charge when he blew his whistle after the smoke shells fell. Lieutenant Coombs heard Cole giving his order to charge, He said, "You dumb son of a bitch, you'll get us all killed." Cole said, "I know that voice, you'll be court-martialed." The bayonet charge of Cole has become famous, but in fact very few men actually did charge with bayonets. Not everybody heard the order from Cole, and not everybody heard the whistle. Cole blew it and charged, firing his Colt pistol. About 20 men followed him. Stukas was in the other side of the road, and he charged with about 40 men. It was 200 to 300 yard dash to the house. James Leach was the first man into the farm. Cole set up his command post in it. Private Sterno and Dobbin shot a German at the same time. Sterno grabbed the German's P-38. As he lifted it up, a bullet slammed into his trigger finger. A medic gave him first aid. Then the medic got shot. Sterno moved on towards the farmhouse, now in American hands, firing with his left hand. Cole saw his bloody hand and told him to go back to the bridge to get treated. He was sat near 3 wounded men. He heard 3 thumps of mortars being fired. He dived to the ground. The 3 wounded men were killed. The Belgian gates had now been moved, and Lieutenant Bob Pick was coming in with ammunition in a weapons carrier and taking wounded men out. After a midday truce to take off wounded, the fighting started again, with the Germans laying down a terrific base of fire. They were advancing back towards the farmhouse. Harrison Summers of WXYZ fame was amongst those holding them off. The attack came across a field planted with cabbages. This part of the battle became known as the Battle of the Cabbage Patch. For leading the action to repulse the Germans, Captain Fred Hancock was awarded the Silver Star. The American artillery had been short of shells, but started firing again, driving back the Germans. Instrumental of the success of this action was the B Company taking Pommenauque, which was full of Germans. Redmond Wales went through several belts of ammunition. Archie Budzes was killed. Lieutenant Coombs was cited for the Silver Star, but never received it. Now, after having sent more men along the Purple Heart Lane, directly into German machine guns, they finally decided to send the 506 to bypass the Germans at Ingouf. So they left the Purple Heart Lane and cut across through the floods. Actually walked 12 miles, making their way through the marshes. So they could approach from the southwest, where the Germans weren't expecting them. The only building in this area at the time was Ingouf Farm. The outskirts of Carentan were now in American hands, but the 502nd had suffered 66% casualties. The final push into Carentan would take place on the 12th and would be a 3-pronged attack.